Reddit family drama. I stopped going home after my dad gave less than he promised when someone offers to help you, but deep down, it's not about kindness. It's about control. This story begins with a promise. I'll help you buy your first home. For a young couple, that meant hope, stability, a future. But what they didn't expect was the price that came with saying yes. Not a price in dollars, but in dignity, in independence, and in how much of your life you're willing to trade just to please someone else. In today's emotional Reddit story, a son is accused of punishing his family simply because he chose to live his life on his own terms, even when that meant saying no to vacations, holidays, and old expectations. Is he ungrateful? Or is he finally choosing freedom over family approval? Let's find out. It started with a promise. A few quiet words spoken during a warm afternoon, while coffee cooled in ceramic mugs and wedding plans danced on the edges of conversation. When the time comes, I'll help with the down payment. For most, that might sound like a simple gesture, but for him, for them, it meant everything. They were young, not reckless, not naive. They both worked hard since college, building a life in Colorado. Their days were filled with purpose. Morning commutes that passed snow-capped mountains, weekend hikes that reached skies too big to be boxed in by buildings, friendships that ran deep and effortless. This wasn't just a location, it was home. So when his father offered that promise, it wasn't just financial support, it was validation. A quiet way of saying, I see you, I believe in your path. They started saving. Every bonus, every birthday check, every dollar they didn't spend on takeout or concerts or cable, they tucked it away. Not because they expected a full ride, but because they were raised to meet effort with effort. Together, they built a picture of what their first home might look like. Not grand, not perfect, but theirs. A porch with just enough room for 2 chairs and morning light, a kitchen where they dance while cooking, a spare room that might someday become a nursery or a messy office filled with dreams. And through it all, his father's promise stayed tucked in their pockets like a lucky coin. Until the day the check arrived. The number was less than expected. Confused, he called his dad. That's when everything shifted. This is more than enough for a house in a normal city. I thought you'd be smart enough to move somewhere cheaper. Cheaper, not quieter, not safer, not closer to family, just cheaper. And suddenly the promise didn't feel like support anymore. It felt like a trade. Give up your life, take the money, start over somewhere that fits someone else's idea of reasonable. He wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly he was stunned, because they had never said they were leaving Colorado, never implied that their roots were temporary. Had his father misunderstood? Or worse, had he never actually cared where they built their life? Only how affordable it was? Still, he said thank you. Still, he expressed gratitude, because it was something, because he was raised to be polite. But deep down, something cracked. Not from the amount of money, but from the realization that the person who offered to help never truly saw what he was helping them build. And in that moment, a new kind of weight settled on their shoulders. The kind that doesn't come from debt, but from disappointment wrapped in generosity. They didn't argue with him. They didn't beg for more, or list the median prices of homes within 50 miles of where they lived. They didn't point out that he had paid in full for his daughter's house, or that he had covered college for their siblings while they worked part-time jobs and carried student debt. They simply said, thank you. And then they did what they had always done. They adjusted. The budget shrank. No more birthday gifts. No more weekend trips. No holidays back home. The summer getaway they used to take each year was quietly crossed off the calendar, replaced with savings goals and spreadsheets. It wasn't dramatic. No fights, no tantrums. Just 2 people trying to make a life out of what they had. They sold things, took on extra freelance work, cut out coffee runs and cable and dinners out. They whispered someday to each other at night while scrolling through real estate listings that still felt out of reach. And in all of it, they reminded themselves, this was still worth it. Because this wasn't about the square footage or the down payment. It was about not giving up the place they loved, the place that made them feel alive. Colorado wasn't just a dot on the map. It was friends that felt like family. It was mountain trails that soothed anxiety better than any prescription. It was snow that fell early, and coffee shops that remembered their names, and sunlight that cracked just right through their apartment window in the morning. It was theirs. And they weren't ready to trade that for a better deal in a place that didn't know them. They made sacrifices, yes, but not with bitterness, with purpose, because home isn't where the prices are low. It's where you're willing to fight to stay. And still, they never spoke badly of his father. When friends asked, they said, "He helped us. We're grateful." Because that was true. But gratitude doesn't cancel out disappointment. And sometimes the hurt comes not from what someone gives you, but from realizing they were never giving it for you in the first place. They weren't punishing anyone. They were simply choosing themselves. And in a world where so many people fold their lives into shapes that fit someone else's expectations, that choice was quietly radical. It started with a phone call. His father's voice, familiar yet distant, carried a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "So you're really not coming home this summer?" He hesitated, careful with his words. "We'd love to, but it's just not possible right now. Every dollar counts." Silence on the other end. Then came the sting. "You're punishing us because I didn't give you what you wanted." There it was. Not a question. A verdict. And suddenly all the quiet sacrifices, every skipped birthday, every holiday missed, every night they spent at home with leftovers instead of flights and gift wrap and smiling family photos, was rebranded as punishment. He tried to explain that this wasn't retaliation, that it wasn't about anger or resentment. It was about math. It was about saving what little they had left after rent, insurance, groceries, and the growing weight of trying to build a life in a world that only seemed to get more expensive by the day. "We're not punishing anyone," he said softly. "We're just trying to get ahead. We're trying to make something of our own." But his father didn't hear it, or maybe he didn't want to, because to him, love looked like plane tickets and wrapped gifts, presents, proximity, tradition, and anything less than that felt like abandonment. "You're being selfish," his father snapped. "You didn't get your way, and now the rest of us are paying the price." He didn't know what hurt more, the accusation itself, or the realization that even now, even after the thank yous and the sacrifices and the silence, his intentions were still misunderstood. He wanted to shout, "You think we're doing this because of the money? You think we enjoy saying no to the people we love?" But instead, he just breathed, because yelling never worked. Not with someone who had already written the ending of the story and cast himself as the victim. And so he said it again, gently, clearly. "We're grateful. But this is what our reality looks like now, and we have to choose what matters most." The call ended cold. No, "I love you." No, "We'll miss you." Just silence. Again. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. Because sometimes doing what's right for your future means disappointing people who only love you when it's convenient. And that's not rebellion. That's adulthood. After the call ended, the silence wasn't just between him and his father. It echoed in other places too. Across old photo albums, forgotten group chats, and family stories where his name always felt like an afterthought. He didn't talk about it often. He barely admitted it to himself. But this wasn't the first time he'd been made to feel like a burden for choosing his own path. He remembered college, how he scraped together scholarships, worked night shifts, and bought secondhand textbooks while his siblings got tuition covered and care packages sent every other week. No one said it out loud, but it was clear. The rules weren't the same for everyone. When his sister announced she was buying a house, their dad paid for it in full, $317,000. No questions asked. But when he and his wife dreamed of doing the same, they got conditions. A smaller sum. A hidden clause. As long as you live where I think you should. And still, he never complained. Never threw it in anyone's face. He sent thank you notes, smiled in Christmas pictures, showed up when he could, even when it cost him more than anyone realized, because he didn't want to be the problem. He didn't want to be that kid. But now, standing here, months into cutting back every expense just to chase a dream he thought his father supported, being told he was selfish, vindictive, ungrateful, something inside him cracked. Not in rage, in grief. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about never being seen, about having to shrink himself again and again just to be palatable, to be accepted, to avoid being labeled too much or too proud or too sensitive. It hurt, not because he expected the same treatment as his siblings, but because he finally realized he never even expected fairness. He had taught himself not to. And now, when he finally chose to live honestly, when he stopped performing, stopped pretending like it didn't sting, he was accused of punishing the family, as if honesty was a weapon, as if protecting your peace meant breaking theirs. He looked at his wife, still hopeful, still steady beside him. She never asked for fairness. She only ever asked for truth. And maybe that's what he needed to offer now. Not to his father, not to the rest of the family, but to himself. It's okay to say it hurt. It's okay to say I deserved more. And it's okay to stop apologizing for asking to be treated like I matter. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach him. Not loud accusations, just the quiet, biting kind. The ones that come dressed as concern. He's changed. He doesn't come around like he used to. His wife must be pulling him away. They think they're better than us now. No one said it directly to his face, but messages got colder. Phone calls came less often. And when they did speak, there was always that subtle edge, like he needed to explain himself, justify his absence, re-earn his place. Why don't you just come home for the holidays? It's just one trip. Don't let money stop you from being with your family. Oi. But it wasn't just one trip. It was flights they couldn't afford. It was guilt wrapped in tradition. It was the unspoken expectation that they'd always bend first, because love is supposed to be flexible, right? He wanted to scream, I'm not punishing anyone, I'm surviving. But instead he stayed quiet. Because what do you say to people who only define family by how often you show up with gifts in your hands? They hadn't seen the nights when he and his wife sat on the living room floor, crunching numbers, wondering if they'd ever save enough to stop renting. They hadn't seen how every dollar they didn't spend was one small brick in a future they were building slowly, painfully, but together. And when he looked around at the life they were carving out, he saw peace. Not comfort, not ease, but peace. There were no lavish vacations, no extravagant celebrations, but there was laughter and silence that didn't feel heavy. There were meals cooked at home, walks at sunset, dreams scribbled in notebooks instead of thrown away in compromise. And that, he realized, was worth more than performing a version of himself others found easier to love. He thought about calling his dad again, explaining everything, laying it out like a spreadsheet, one line at a time. But what would be the point? People hear what they want. And when you stop being convenient, they call it betrayal. So instead, he chose something else. He chose to keep showing up for the life he was building, to keep choosing honesty over harmony, to accept that sometimes growing up means becoming the villain in someone else's story, simply because you refuse to stay small. And in that quiet resistance, there was a strange kind of freedom, not one that came easy, but one he could finally call his own. In the end, no dramatic explosion ever came. There was no final showdown, no tearful reunion, no angry ultimatum, just distance. A quiet growing space between who he used to be and who he was becoming. He wasn't cutting ties. He wasn't slamming doors. He was simply no longer reaching where there was no hand reaching back. And maybe that's what growing up really is. Not rebellion, not rejection, but acceptance. Accepting that some people will only love the version of you that serves them. That some relationships depend on your silence more than your truth. And when you stop pretending, when you finally speak or act or just stop showing up, they call it selfish. They call it punishment. They call it change. But really, it's just the sound of you taking your life back. He still thought about his father. Often. Not with bitterness. Not even with anger. But with a quiet ache. The kind that comes when you realize someone you loved never truly saw you. Not as you were, but only as they hoped you'd be. And maybe, he thought, that was the hardest part. Not being misunderstood, but having to walk away knowing the version of him that finally spoke up would never be the version they'd accept. Still, he didn't regret it. Not the missed holidays, not the birthday calls that went unanswered, not the silence. Because every time he chose his peace over their expectations, he felt a little more free. He wasn't doing it to prove a point. He was doing it to live. and that, in itself, was enough. He looked at his wife one evening as they walked home from the grocery store, reusable bags in hand, the air crisp with early fall. They laughed about something small, maybe a song on the radio or a memory from college, and he realized. They had built something real, maybe not grand, maybe not impressive from the outside, but it was steady, it was safe, it was theirs. And that's all he'd ever wanted. So if anyone asked again, "Aren't you being a little harsh? Couldn't you just let it go?" He'd smile gently and think to himself, I did let it go. I just didn't let go of myself in the process. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is choose yourself in a room full of people who expect you to keep choosing them. But here's the truth. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for wanting to build your own life on your own terms. And you are not wrong for stepping back from people who only show up when they're the ones being celebrated. Family isn't proven through traditions. It's proven through presence, respect, and the space to grow without fear of being labeled ungrateful. So, if you've ever felt this pull between keeping the peace and keeping your peace, know that you're not alone, and you're not the villain for finally choosing honesty over silence. Have you ever been made to feel guilty for putting your own well-being first? Share your story in the comments below, because your voice, your experience, might help someone else feel less alone in theirs. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more real emotional family drama, Reddit stories, told with heart.